After spending more than 70 hours playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2, learning more about the concept and creation of the product, I finally reached my conclusion on it. To get this out of the way, and to understand my point of view on this big critique, I think it's important to note that I did not really enjoy playing the first Xenoblade Chronicles, barely touched Xenoblade Chronicles X before dropping it, and Xenogears is one of my favorite games of all time. This video is more of a way to express my thoughts on this game and why I did not enjoy it, and I don't really plan on comparing it to any other game in the series. I basically took the game as a standalone entry and going in completely blind, without expecting anything. This review will be spoiler-free as well, and I won't show any footage of the main story for that reason. I'm not going to spend much time describing the mechanics of the game to their very core, there are plenty of classic reviews out there, but I'll still inform you of the basic characteristics of the game. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, like the first game, is a classic feeling JRPG with an automatic battle system. You travel through multiple places with gorgeous environments and music, fight monsters, complete side quests, unveil secrets, pretty basic stuff. Most of the story unveils itself in pretty well-directed cutscenes with their own amount of drama and stuff going on. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is more light than the first game, and its relaxed atmosphere makes it by far the most welcoming game of the Xeno meta-series. The story and universe revolve around a world where gigantic titans roam the Sea of Clouds, creatures so big that entire species and cultures have spawned on them. There are also blades, a sort of weaponized life form that grants their master strong power. The people who wield blades are called drivers. The main protagonist is Rex, just some kid salvager, which means he explores the Sea of Cloud to hunt for treasures and all that. He soon meets Pyra, a special blade with exceptional power, and will help her find the Elysium, a holy place that lies at the very top of the World Tree, which is the central point of the Sea of Cloud. Rex, Pyra and some other friends will help each other to reach that sacred place. It is a very long RPG, taking up to 80 hours just to go through the main story. That was a pretty short summary, but that should do to give people who don't know much about the game enough context. Now, it's time to talk about what I thought of the game. I try not to be too harsh, but I don't know if I achieved that. So sorry in advance to Xenoblade fans, but I sure hope you'll be able to understand what I'm trying to say in this long video, and if I said something dumb, you can always let me know in a comment. Unfortunately, even if Xenoblade 2 is a pretty friendly game in its presentation, it is not really an easy game to comprehend and play through. Just to learn most of the basic mechanics, it took me more than 30 hours. The way the game lets the player learn its mechanics is really counterproductive. You only get textbox tutorials which don't help you in any way to learn the most important parts of battling, and a lot of things just go over your head because everything is so messy and cryptic. At least I knew what I was doing, but it felt like I was lucky enough to have friends explain all of this crap for me instead of the game casually leaning the player towards learning all of that themselves. Speaking of battles, there's also this constant anger from being harassed by monsters absolutely everywhere. Sometimes the music and places I went to were gorgeous and magnificent until a monster barges in to piss me off while I'm contemplating or something. The game doesn't even have any difficulty choice as well, which means that if you're here just for the story, you can't play as you like. You'll be forced to dive into tiresome and long battles just for the sake of progressing through the story. Xenoblade X had a system where you could lower the level of the enemies if you were struggling, but there is none of that in this game. I don't get why, considering how simple it could be to just make an easy option where the game cuts the enemy HPs lower, giving the player better defense or something. What really made the game annoying to play was the amount of content there is in side quests. It's just too damn overwhelming for me, and I ended up giving up trying them all out just to play through the main quest. But if you do that, you end up missing a lot of stuff that actually makes the game easier, so you have to keep your eyes everywhere. Mercenaries mission, accessories, food and items, sociograms, equipment, blade gachas, characters that have their own classes depending on their blades, dealing with money, farming, gathering the materials, repetitive side quests. The list goes on and absolutely never stops. I just played through the game the hard way, not caring about all that simply because I prefer to play it that way, since that's how I enjoyed playing through the first game. I do not want to overwhelm myself with uninteresting mechanics. I do not want to deal with all this stuff that just bores me to death, so why should I? But this decision was a blow at the worst difficulty spikes of the game and kicked my ass far too many times for me to enjoy. Those problems have been here since the first Xenoblade game, and it's been at the core of the series forever, so of course they aren't gonna lighten it up. If you play this game, you better pray that you enjoy doing all of this side content stuff. If you don't, you're gonna suffer just like I did. Sometimes the main story asks you to have sufficient skills to progress, but if you don't have those yet, you're locked. Well, most of the time it's corrected by feeding your blade the right items, but it's still fairly annoying for those locks to be here in the first place. A better way to do that would have been to let the player choose between different paths to reach an objective, which is the case most of the time, but sometimes you're just forced to go through those locks. The game will never let you play the way you want, and no matter how bad you want to simply enjoy the story and not give a damn about tactics and the intimidating combat system, and a lot of its routes and menus, you're in for a terrible time. And for a role-playing game, feeling like doing whatever you want is usually one of the most important aspects. Something stops being optional when it becomes mandatory to go on in the main story. Sounds obvious, but the entirety of the content in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 completely forgets that. I found the combat system less obnoxious than in the first episode. You can now do elemental combos depending on you and your friends' blades and their elements, and once you get the hang of it, it can be interesting. Though they can be extremely risky since they require you to use your blue gauge in the top left corner of the screen, which is the same that is used for resurrecting yourself or the others. The combat system is often do or die, for better or for worse. The game seemed more accessible thanks to the new battle system, and I felt way more engaged in battles. It took me a while, but I got used to it, though it has the worst tutorials and ways of making you understand the mechanics I've ever seen in a video game before. But the main issue of the combat system is how so many of them are based on stats and RNG sometimes. I honestly think I was pretty good at the game in how the battles take place. I was able to do combos very fast and I had a good balance of elements in my blade choices, dealt a lot of right timed attacks to raise my blade levels and all that. But as long as you don't have the right level for some battles, you're just stuck, and that's never something I enjoyed in RPG in general because it's simply artificial instead of asking the player to play well. I'm fine with punishing mistakes, but when I'm not making any and still keep dying, there's a problem to me. So all you can do when you're stuck is do some grinding, or even optional content and side quests. The structure of the side quests are far from well composed. You know how in Nier Automata, whenever you complete a portion of a side quest, you get rewards even if you didn't finish it. It motivates the player to go on with it, and even if they don't see the end of it or simply want to do something else, the time you spend doing it is not wasted. But in Xenoblade 2, you're constantly asked to get some items or kill some enemy. Once you do and get back to the client, you don't get anything in return, and then you've got another objective which is most of the time identical to the previous one. This could have been avoided if you were simply tasked to get everything you need at the same time. If the objective is too intimidating for the players, they could simply skip it and do something else instead of wasting their time. But here, usually the quests are structured this way. Get the items, get back to your client, get more items, get back to your clients, and repeat until there's no writing left, and get your rewards. If you got rewards and experience once you are done with every section of a side quest, that'd be way better. You could go back later. It gives you experience and eventually makes you stronger to do some other side quests until you go back to your original objective or not. But nope, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 works in a do it and get everything at the end way. And when you're already struggling for the main quest and need to do some side content to level up, this ends up being the most frustrating shit on earth. Near the end of chapter 7 I almost lost it. There was a boss that just felt mathematically too strong for me to pass through. I tried every possible build, equipment, everything, and still couldn't do it. Because of that I was forced to grind some of the most dull and boring side quests I've ever seen before. I spent half an hour on one until I was asked to go and clear yet a third objective, and to get access to a certain zone, I needed a level 6 blade with ice power that I didn't have. So I was stuck yet again, on the side content. It was never ending, I had to keep doing side quests praying that I could actually finish them. Side content that asks you to do more side content to proceed. They're a chore, completely unfulfilling and have no impact on anything at all aside from giving you barely enough XP to level up. At this point in the game, and I'm serious about what I'm going to say, I don't think I've ever felt this negative while playing a game before. I felt like everything I've played through those 50 hours were meaningless, useless, like I just wasted days of my life on it. I felt stupid and awful because nothing felt decent in the slightest in my experience. It was bad things stuck with other bad things, with even more bad things added all together to create one of the worst RPG experiences I've ever had in my entire life. I spent hours and even more hours just to catch up with the fake and mathematically difficulty that the game imposed on me just so I could progress through the main story. And that happened again on chapter 9, where I had to grind for XP because I was just 4 levels short to actually do anything during another fight. I could inflict tons of elemental orbs on the enemy, but since me and my teammates died so many times and so easily, I could never perform a single combo to destroy those orbs and perform correctly. And even if I did, an empty friendship gauge means that a single death is enough to end a long 10 minutes battle. Tell me again that an easy mode is unnecessary for this kind of game, I dare you. Because it's necessary. People don't all play the same way, and if there's an easy way to appeal to a bigger audience without impacting on the quality of the game aside from making it more accessible and friendly to others, developers should definitely take it. And then I tried a battle where I was blocked again, with the exact same level as before, with the same build as the time I first fought it, and luckily won somehow. I don't even know how, but at this point in the game I just embraced this luck to proceed through the game. Speaking of which, some chapters are completely disconnected from the main story, and that's fine, but you have to do some stuff that's sometimes almost completely irrelevant to the story, aside from some weird shonen anime filler episode-like thing. It's kind of funny in a way, because there are like portions that felt added at the last minute to make the game longer, because most of the dialogues in those parts don't even have voiceover, which feels completely unnatural since every other main event in the game are in the form of cutscenes or in-depth dialogues. Like that one part in an early chapter where you either have to grind and be lucky enough to reach a certain level of field skills to progress, or send some blades on a 40-minute quest to do the job for you while all you can do is just wait or grind in the meantime. It's pointless, boring, useless, stupid and busy work and completely unnecessary to the main story and definitely not worth it in the end. Sometimes there's even more hunting fetch quests or grinding. Or how about that part in chapter 7 where you need specific blade skills where you need to be lucky enough to even use the required blade to proceed through the main quest. Luckily enough for me, I just about managed to reach those requirements because I used them, but what about players who didn't? Speaking of which, whenever you have hazards on the map, you always and constantly need to swap around your blades to get the right requirements to get past those. Because of course, the game ignores the blades that are not assigned directly into your team. You'll have to swap them with your combat ones, hope you don't get aggroed by some random overpowered enemy while you're getting past the obstacle, and pray you got the composition right. I don't understand why the game doesn't process through every blade you have in your inventory. A small inconvenience, but I've spent way too much damn time on these menus. There are a lot of moments like those in the game, and they clearly don't help or motivate the player to have fun, even through the main content. Near the last few chapters, long cutscenes felt like bliss because I at least didn't have to play the game. That's how bad it was for me. I could spend hours just talking about every detail that brings about pure annoyance for me, like how some lower level quests require you to pass through the only road that contain tons of level 80 enemies, but whatever. But anyway, now that I've talked about the game in itself, let's talk about the narrative aspect. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 takes place in a sort of fantasy setting, but with its own rules and world building. Basically, instead of taking place on some planet with earth and water, Xenoblade 2 takes place in an immense sea of cloud. Here, titans live. Gigantic titans which are sometimes so big that they have their own ecosystem, places, and of course, towns and countries. Basically like the first game, but this time with more titans instead of there being just 2 titans. In the middle of all that is the world tree, which kinda is the Yggdrasil of the world, with the main plot and objective relying on that. I find this idea fascinating, original and really interesting, and kudos for that because I usually can't digest game with a classic fantasy setting. But just because you have a setting doesn't mean you have a story. There are games with good premise and ideas that end up being very poorly executed. Xenoblade 2 on the other hand is a fairly well executed but unsurprising game struggling to be meaningful at all for me. The entire game and story has an identity crisis, and loses itself between trying to act self-aware, falling in its own traps in the process like a bad 2010 light novel, moments of pure nothingness and really memorable and dramatic scenes. Xenoblade 2 is not an awful story. It's constructed in an okay way, there aren't many contradictions or things left unexplained, I can't deny that. But I absolutely can't lie to myself here. Xenoblade 2 was not impactful in any meaningful way. It is a really simple plot, game, and execution. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Maybe I'm just not meant for this kind of teenager fantasy story, but the game is designed with such a vast and big idea that it just fails at delivering a simple story. Every mechanic, every gameplay element, every useless side quest is there to remind us that the game is wide, complex, with a lot to explore and plenty of rewards for your accomplishments. But this is in direct conflict with the way the plot and story is built. A story ceases to be straightforward and candid when everything else is overwhelming and here to make us feel like we're on a titanic journey with the fate of the world on our shoulders. Maybe I'm biased, maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm overthinking this, lots of maybe went through my head while I was playing this, but Xenoblade 2 failed at trying to capture anything of interest for me. I don't want to be taken for an idiot, I don't want any of this serious journey that ends up saving the world, I wanted something more childish or more mature or one or the other. But Xeno 2 is trying desperately to make us go through both at the same time, but all it left me with was this uncanny feeling of not understanding what the game is going for. It lacks the innocence, charm and substance of a classic and feel-good adventure like Dragon Ball or Pokemon, but it also lacks the depth and mature content of a rich adult story. And Xenoblade Chronicles 2's atmosphere constantly tries to adapt to this dramatically different mood but completely fails at it. Less ambitious than any RPG I've played to appeal to a more teen-friendly audience, the kind of audience that would clearly rather play Pokemon or Zelda anyway, because of that it avoids darker themes like Xenogears did. In the storytelling aspect, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 felt plain, tasteless, and without much of a unique vibe. Every chapter is structured and written in a similar way. You have a new objective, go and discover a new place, spend hours admiring it and defeating some monsters, reach a new town, have a few unsurprising events, something terrible happens to someone, usually Pyra, you then go save them, you have some dungeon, win and save the day, and suddenly the bad guys come and do something very evil, end of chapter, repeat. It is not fun, predictable, and the character interactions in between do not make up for it. And let's not talk about the comedy of the game in its first half, trying to make some self-awareness or mockery of basic light novel fanservice humor, since it's doing the exact same thing hours later, completely unironically like there's not a care in the world. And making me feel like I'm playing or watching some early 2000 teen fantasy or some random PlayStation 2 RPG. Actually, the entire game felt like it came out 15 years too late. But back then, this could have been excused because it was a pretty experimental era where JRPGs were trying to adapt to a wider audience like Final Fantasy X, trying science fiction like Xenosaga, finding a special art direction like Okami, being as unorthodox as possible like Shin Megami Tensei, being as weird and dark as possible like Drakengard. Those titles were ambitious, had something going for them, themes, and that's why these games are still memorable to this day, and I can say the same for Xenoblade 2. Because Xenoblade 2 really doesn't have anything special, fun, or innocent going on, like a melting pot of cliches and the worst aspects of the genre. The characters are not all dislikable, but they're mostly stereotyped to a depressing end, like Zeke, or simply eye-candy plot device like Pyra. Some others can be fun, like Morytha, which I applaud for being one of the only characters I almost love just because she doesn't act like a dumb spoiled brat all the time. Puppy is nice, but was unfortunately fetishized to no end because some writers couldn't help but make her a stereotyped moe blob at times. Tora is here doing his stuff and moaning all the time, Nia is kinda alright aside from the Neko Girl meme fest, and Rex. After playing for so long as him and no one else, I still don't know about him. At the same time, he's the most cliché teenager male character that could exist, but I don't wanna kill myself whenever he speaks at least. He's composed most of the time, and overall, he's just a nice guy that knows how to keep his shit for himself, and he's pretty respectable. But it's like he has this constant sticker on his forehead saying protagonist, and that's what I hate most about the character build-up and the interactions. It's like everyone was made to fit a space in the game without really trying to link them much together. They're supposed to be close friends, but we never really see any interaction between them, let alone some serious discussions or even drama. Aside from Pyra, obviously, since she's a girl plot device with a tragic backstory, I didn't enjoy Xenoblade 1 either, but I can at least remember that Shulk, Donban, Ryan and Fiora really did live a while together. They're family, and the other characters soon joined them, and they still feel like a much more connected band of friends than Xenoblade 2's way of approaching it. There was one part towards the beginning of Chapter 7, minor spoiler here, when Rex kinda goes through this usual I'm useless anyway scene, and I've gotta admit that this was one of the only scenes of the game where we actually see characters acting like human beings. People are upset and some characters are angry at Rex and stuff, and overall that was a powerful scene, but after that it just went back to being Xenoblade 2. He's got his objective in mind and nothing else, in a really innocent way, and for that I kinda like it. He really makes me think of a classic shonen protagonist like Gon or Son Goku. The game plays with that during the later part of the story, which is also a nice touch. Chapter 10 really helped to make the story a bit more interesting to follow to. Speaking of which, it's by far the most intriguing chapter, and it's a pretty good conclusion and it has some daring moves, but it's still not worthwhile enough to go through dozens of hours of playing. Rex never really goes through any kind of real character development, for better or for worse. It's like the game refuses to be ambitious or involving in any way, like there's no will to make it feel remarkable, distinctive from the rest in the pile of rotting plain JRPGs. The most depressing part is that a lot of elements in the games were designed with a lot of love, but every other angle of the game are corny, edgy, pointy and rough. Anyway, the more I played, the more I learned to like some of its aspects, but its flaws just grew bigger and bigger the more I went on in it. I appreciated some parts and disliked some others. A quick and simple question you may ask of me will be, then why do you even play Xenoblade 2 if you hated the first game? Well, since I knew Xenoblade 2 had a much more simpler and intimate story, I imagined it to be on par with one of my favorite parts of the first entry, exploring a land of wonder and bask in a sea of great music and environment art, but this time with more emotions, more character build-ups, and truly this game delivers. That is, only on its environment and sound ambience, but that's about it. Everything else felt like trash to me. Xenoblade 2 marked for me the end of the trust I had in Takahashi for the series, and I didn't even expect anything much. Somehow I knew what was coming for me, but I thought that maybe Takahashi could understand what he's best at and give in to make Xenoblade 2 a memorable game for its themes and characters' psychology. But it didn't. Can I blame him? No. It seems the team is proud of what they have accomplished. The saddest part here is to tell myself that the kind of game I'm looking for, Takahashi is not interested in making them. It feels like an important person in my life gave up doing what I love, instead to do what I hate most, making something unmemorable. And I would prefer a wonky and unfinished ambitious title to a well-executed game that has nothing for itself, nothing to feel different from the rest. In the end, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 feels like a pointless game with no ambitions, with no flavor, with nothing to prove itself and separate itself from the rest. The game is here, it's not awful, but it's not pleasing or memorable in any other way. And that makes me sad, far more than angry. I don't like ending videos on a negative note, but I guess those things just happen. However, if the game does interest you in some way, maybe you're not looking for the same things in a game as I. So go for it, give it a shot, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Thank you for having watched this video. It was hard for me to come up with the right words without feeling like an asshole, but I think I did okay. If you do disagree or feel like pointing stuff out, leave it down in the comments, I'd love to discuss with you. Thanks to Mimi for proofreading my text, and especially Rachel on Twitter for lending me his media and making this video possible. If you enjoy what I do and wish to support me in the future, you can check out my Patreon in the link below in the description. For a small monthly dollar, you can participate in a nice and chill Discord channel and get tons of other rewards like videos in advance, special updates, exclusive content and stuff. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you around.